Seeing no other hands up, we will move on to announcements and presentation. First item A, not vaccinated against COVID-19 yet? Now is the time. There are two options to find a free vaccination site. You can visit smchealth.org vaccine clinic calendar, or just call 211 for San Mateo County, and the county partner operator will get you situated with clinics, or you can certainly go online, which has been quite a bit now, for visit myturn.ca.gov, or you can call 1-833-422-4255. Again, that's 1-833-422-4255 for other local sites, including our local pharmacies. So just again, I think our council is behind that. We think it's important, and we encourage you as well, and there are many options and opportunities. Moving on to item B, recognizing Judith Piccini for her years of service to the San Bruno community. This is something that we want to acknowledge as a community, and I'm going to be presenting an award on that behalf. And there is a lot of verbiage, but this person has given decades to this community, and so I think it's appropriate to acknowledge those achievements, accolades, and the service and love that she has for this community. Recognizing Judith Piccini's years of community service. Whereas Judith Piccini has resided in San Bruno for 60 years, committing passion, time, and energy to improving the quality of life, with a focus on youth in San Bruno and San Mateo County as a whole. And whereas Judith Piccini, whose children attended the San Bruno public school grades K through 12, volunteered in leadership roles to support the education of all children in the San Bruno community, including being PTA president in both the San Bruno Park and San Mateo Union High School districts, and was appointed by superintendents in both school districts to serve on numerous advisory committees, including long-range planning, school improvement, and sports, and being selected chairperson of many of those groups. Whereas Judith Piccini was promoted to increasing roles of responsibility during her 16 years on the staff at Cappuccino High School, culminating in her appointment to executive assistant to the principal during those 16 years on the staff at Cappuccino High School, was honored and revered for her dedication to enriching school climate for students, staff, and teachers in ways that are legendary. And whereas Judith Piccini, long after retirement, was still assisting Cappuccino High School in a volunteer capacity, including mending and laundering school sport team items and uniforms, and helped to create the Cappuccino Alumni Association, serving as the board vice president, committing hours weekly to connect alumni in meaningful ways with the school and writing successful grants to enhance educational programs to support Cappuccino's vision and mission. And whereas Judith Piccini, exemplary service in the San Mateo County included appointment to the grand jury and the Superior Court and Board of Supervisors, to the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Committee, serving for 12 years, and to the Board of Directors for Parents Who Care. President in the 17th District of the PTA, coordinated the Drug Diversion Program for Project Pegasus, and coordinated South County Schools Drug and Alcohol Consortium. And whereas Judith Piccini has served on the City of San Bruno Culture and Arts Commission and on the Board of Directors of the Western Arts, volunteering at the gallery in San Bruno. She has always been honored and was by the San Bruno Chamber as the San Bruno Volunteer of the Year, and by the City of San Bruno to receive the Congressional Service Award presented to her by then U.S. Congressman Tom Lantos. And whereas Judith Piccini pursued training and volunteered in programs that educate and empowered youth to make positive choices under peer pressure. She has also been a dedicated volunteer at St. Andrew's Church in San Bruno, including teaching and being superintendent of Sunday school and the vestry member. And now, therefore, let it be resolved that I, Rico E. Medina, Mayor of San Bruno, and on behalf of the city of San Bruno, gives the Mayor's Honor Award and expresses our deep gratitude to Judith Bacchini, who has, for 6 decades, been a role model for what it means to give of oneself unselfishly to improve her community and the lives of others. It is my honor to give this to somebody well-deserving, overdue, but very important. And these were the times of before Facebook and posting or Nextdoor. You did it. You did it because you had a commitment and a desire and a passion to leave things better than you found it and to make a difference along the way. And Judith Bacchini, aka Judy, has done just that. We are honored and proud to have her and to have the ability that she touched many lives from when I met her as a student at Cappuccino High School to today. So it is with my honor and privilege to award that to her and thank her again from a grateful community. Now we will move on to item C, receive an update on the September 14th, 2021 gubernatorial recall election. City Clerk.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and City Council. Just one moment here while I get adjusted. Is everyone able to see the presentation? Thumbs up, thank you. Okay, first off, tonight we are going to discuss the gubernatorial recall election, which has been declared by the California Secretary of State as to be held on September 14th, 2021, as well as to give you an update on the November 2021 election. One second here. So earlier this month, the California Secretary of State did announce that September 14th, 2021, that is a Tuesday, would be the gubernatorial recall election date. This is a state election. It will be held in all counties across the state. And because this was announced later than normal, July is a pretty late date to announce a September election. We also were faced with SB 152, which was adopted on June 28th, 2021. SB 152 basically states that we would have had to have called an election prior to June 15th, 2021 in order for us to be able to consolidate a local election with San Mateo County so that it would fall on September 14th, 2021, the gubernatorial election. Because we did not do that, because frankly, SB 152 was adopted on June 28th, 2021, we were unable to place any ballot measure on the September 14th election date. Now, there are some details here that are bulleted. I won't read them all to you. I'm sure they can get a little confusing because they are directly from legislation, but it details what SB 152 is as far as the details that we need specifically for local elections. So basically what it's saying on F2 is saying the original date on which the special local election was called is not more than 30 days before and not more than 30 days after the date of the gubernatorial recall election. What this means is if we had had a resolution to create a ballot measure to place with the gubernatorial recall election date, we would have had to have picked a special election date ourselves, and that date, in order to be consolidated with the gubernatorial recall, would have had to have fallen within 30 days before the September 14th date or 30 days after that date for us to be eligible to consolidate. And because we had not done so, we cannot qualify to place any measure on the September 14th election date. So for this next slide here is for September 14th, as well as a potential standalone election in November. Keep in mind, there is no set November election this year that has been announced. Typically in even years, there are elections in November. Odd years, there are special elections in November, and there has been no special election date in November from San Mateo County announced at this point. Scenario one that we have listed here in relation to estimated election cost, it has to do with the special election consolidated with the gubernatorial recall election. And as stated from the previous slide, this scenario is not viable because we're unable to consolidate due to the details in SB 152. For scenario two, for the standalone city special election, perhaps that's in November. It would be a special election date that we would basically be creating. We did receive a quote from San Mateo County Elections Division in May of this year that gave us a price quote of $421,000 up to $505,000 to hold an election to have one ballot measure placed on a special election in 2021. We had asked specifically for November 2021, no specific date, just November. And that was the quote that we were provided from San Mateo County Elections Division. Now, I did want to note that the city of Belmont recently asked for their own purposes for a quote for a standalone special election in November 2021, no specific date, for two ballot measures. And they were given a price quote of $681,600 up to $817,920 for services rendered by San Mateo County Elections Division should they hold that special election. So at this time, we have no date. We've taken the information for the gubernatorial election as well as the quote provided from San Mateo County. And this is what we have for any potential 2021 election. If you have any questions, I would be happy to assist.
Okay, we could stop sharing the screen, and then I'm going to, please, and then I'm going to call on Council Member Mason, please.
Can you hear me?
A little in and out.
My connection not too great. I just wanted to get the information requested for a couple items. Given that the cost would be the same amount to fix one whole park, I just want to say that I wouldn't support that special city election at this point. So
I'm sorry, I didn't get some of that.
Let me try to. Can you hear me?
Yeah, why don't you try again, please?
Yeah, I was just saying that thank you for looking into the numbers, and given the cost of a special city election, I wouldn't support it at this point. But I really appreciate the work put into this, and hopefully next time we would kind of get ahead of the ball around the June 15th date if there is a next time. But I just wanted to thank you for getting the work done, and again for the cost. That would be cost to fix an entire park for us in downtown. So thank you so much.
We got that. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? We do have somebody from the public, and if City Clerk, will you be so kind?
Yes, let me pull up the timer, just one moment. And the speaker is Paul Wapensky. Just one moment while I bring you in.
Yeah, I may have missed it, but what was the special election for? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I think I missed it during the brief, but what's the special election, or what was the special election going to be for? That was all I had.
Mayor, did you want me to take that, or did you?
Ann, thank you for asking, and please do, City Clerk.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rapinski. The proposed special election for November would have been to have a rotating mayor instead of a directly elected mayor for San Bruno.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands up and none from my colleagues, we will go ahead and move on to announcements and presentations. Item D, receive a report from the San Bruno Police and Fire Departments regarding July 4th, 2021 public safety operations. And we'll turn it over to our police chief and then to our fire chief, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you can give me just a second, I'll try to get my video turned on here as well. Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties here with Zoom.
There's no branding anywhere on it. It's really weird.
City Clerk, are you able to stop my screen share, or am I the only one who's able to stop that? Thank you. We'll try this again.
Would you like me to pull up the presentation?
No, I have it. It just got stuck in the screen share mode. Thank you very much. That should do it. Let's
Okay.
go over here. Okay. Are you able to see my screen now? Great. Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and members of the community that are watching from home. My name is Ryan Johansen. I am your chief of police here in the city of San Bruno, and I'll be joined this evening by our fire chief, Ari DeLay, as well, in an effort to give a brief recap of our 4th of July safety operations, the annual report we give following the 4th of July to inform everybody about our operations, the statistical data, and the outcomes. So digging right in here, a little bit of background information. So safe and sane fireworks are permitted in San Bruno. This is via voter measure G in 2005 through voter approval. And as a result, the 4th of July presents a number of safety challenges for police and fire, not only on the 4th of July itself, but really in the days immediately prior and immediately following the 4th of July. Mostly this pertains to the use of illegal fireworks before, during, and after the 4th. But also we have problems with large unruly gatherings, the increased use of alcohol that comes with the celebrations. And this is always exacerbated to a certain degree when the 4th of July falls on a weekend, which last year fell on a Saturday, this year fell on a Sunday. So the last 2 years have been a bit busier than most with it falling on a weekend. Some of the things we do immediately to address this are really an expansive education, prevention, and enforcement operation or campaign every year. And it's important to understand, and we'll talk a couple of times here today about the fact that these operations are almost entirely funded by the sale of safe and sane fireworks, taxes that are imposed on those sales. And nonetheless, while we do the best we can, and we're going to talk a lot about that here this evening, all this education, prevention, and enforcement does not and will not ever stop the use of illegal fireworks in the city of San Bruno. Pre-4th of July, we engage in a number of operations in an effort to get out ahead of this problem every year. The first among those is that we complete a robust incident action plan. And this really is a plan that is fairly extensive. It incorporates a unified command between police and fire, accounts for all the contingencies that you can imagine could occur from an emergency perspective for the 4th of July, pulls together all of our different resources, and really gives marching orders to the line level as to what they're supposed to be doing before, during, and after the 4th in an effort to keep the celebrations as safe as possible. We also create a joint public safety announcement with fire. This gets built in video and then is disseminated through our various social media platforms numerous times before the 4th of July in an effort to educate the community year over year about the potential dangers of use of illegal fireworks, the legal ways to use safe and sane fireworks, and the potential penalties associated with using illegal fireworks or misusing safe and sane fireworks. We also conduct safety meetings with all of the booth operators to ensure that fireworks sales operations are legal and safe, and those are joint with fire as well. We produce educational flyers that are provided with every single fireworks sale at every booth in an effort to make it very clear what is legal and what is not within the city of San Bruno. We also provide similar warning notices in all city facilities. This is a little impacted last year and this year due to COVID and the lack of traffic in those city facilities, but we do it nonetheless, and year over year, this is yet another way we try to get information out before the 4th of July. The police department also maintains a fairly extensive list of known violation locations. So these are residences where we've had previous unruly gatherings during the 4th of July, or significant levels of illegal fireworks use, or individuals that have been cited for illegal fireworks use. And in the days leading up to the 4th of July, we actually bring in officers on an overtime basis to make peaceful contact at those locations in an effort to gain compliance ahead of time, to let them know kind of that they're on our radar and that we will be out on the 4th in force. We also use a great deal of data to focus our resource deployment. This has to do with mapping calls for service year over year, as well as areas where citations are written. And then also this year, we were able to utilize our new mobile command vehicle to pull in real-time data as it's developing in the field and populate a map with that data in order to deploy our limited resources as effectively as possible. We also have dedicated enforcement details prior to the 4th of July, where officers come in on an overtime basis, respond to complaints of illegal fireworks, and canvass the busier neighborhoods for people using illegal fireworks even before the 4th of July. And that brings us to the 4th itself. So 4th of July staffing is a challenge for us. The reality is, many of you have heard me say time and time again in the presentations that lead up to the 4th of July here at Council and on other platforms, all San Bruno Police Department personnel are ordered to work the 4th of July. This means that regardless of how your days off fall or what else you might have scheduled, you will be working if you work for the San Bruno Police Department and it is the 4th of July. This year, that amounted to 42 staff members between officers, dispatchers, clerks, and CSOs. 28 sworn and 14 non-sworn personnel. This is 8 fewer sworn than in 2020, which means we were impacted 4 teams. Our city runs in a service of 3 beats or service areas. And so each service area was minus 1 2-officer team compared to what it was last year. And then there was an additional 2-officer team missing from our detail. This has to do primarily with authorized staffing levels, budget constraints, and then as well, we have injuries and other people who are out and not able to work in the field at present. Many of these officers worked a 16-hour day or more in order to make sure that we had coverage during the busier time of the evening. All of the police beats were staffed as usual with patrol officers, plus there are dedicated enforcement units deployed. This is sort of important to mention because I think there's a bit of a misconception that, the 4th of July happens and 100% of our efforts are dedicated to fireworks enforcement. The fact is that we still have over 100 calls for service in that day that do not pertain to illegal fireworks that need to be handled by beat officers, everything from domestic violence calls to noise complaints to all of the normal sort of variety of calls that the police department responds to continue and oftentimes on a weekend are exacerbated on the 4th of July. The dedicated enforcement units consist of both marked and unmarked units. So this means police vehicles that look black and white and have the red and blue lights on top and are immediately identifiable as police vehicles, as well as many vehicles that are not at all identifiable as police vehicles unless they illuminate their emergency lights. This year, we put about 80% of our units out in the unmarked units in an effort to be a little bit less immediately detected in the neighborhoods where illegal fireworks are being used. And we know that in past years, many of the people using illegal fireworks are incorporating the use of lookouts, and a black and white vehicle is spotted from a very far distance and makes it increasingly difficult to issue citations. So we deployed a few more unmarked units than marked this year. We use both uniformed and plainclothes personnel. We have undercover officers that are on the streets in plain clothes, not immediately identifiable as police officers, many of them on foot for a large part of the evening in order to get in closer to where illegal fireworks are being used, and to conduct the observations that are needed to direct in marked units to come in and issue citations. We also, the last 2 years, have employed undercover surveillance units. These are vehicles that are very nondescript and designed to conduct recorded surveillance. They deploy into the neighborhoods in an effort to conduct observations that they can then again direct via radio to bring marked units in to issue citations. This has been particularly effective the past couple of years, but it is a somewhat limited resource in that we only have so many undercover vehicles available that are not easily spotted as police cars. And we also only have a certain number of our personnel that are qualified or certified to work undercover in plain clothes. One unfortunate consequence of staffing restrictions this year is that we did not have our bicycle units out. Bicycle units, while slower than vehicles, obviously, and have a little bit more difficulty getting around town quickly, are actually quite effective in navigating through the streets undetected on the 4th of July and getting in and issuing citations. And we were not able to staff our bicycle units due to minimal staffing this year. In addition to all of this police staffing, we have dedicated fire department staff, which Chief DeLay will talk about in a few moments here. We also have dedicated parks department staff and streets department staff, parks to help us keep the parks clean and clear and free of any kind of dangers throughout the evening, and then streets department for what ends up being a very large scale cleanup operation following the 4th of July every year. So specifically calls for service this year. On the 4th of July, the police department handled 298 calls for service. This is 10 more than last year, so pretty standard for a 4th of July on a weekend. The peak activity period, once again, was about a 2.5-hour window from 8:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. During that period of time alone, we have 152 calls for service. 185 of the 298 calls for service on the 4th of July were fireworks related. This is 3 more than last year, so again, fairly consistent with what we see on a 4th of July when it falls on the holiday, or on the weekend, I'm sorry. And most of the reports we get, as I reported last year, are actually really quite vague and marginally workable at best. And this is somewhat important information for us to convey to the community. We're always, many of you have heard me speak many times over the years about the importance of the eyes and ears of our community. The police department, you know, for us, you truly are our force multipliers, and policing the community is always done in that collaboration where we need the community to report violations so that the police can respond to them. But fireworks violations, by their very nature, being very transitory and being often not really directly observed in terms of who's committing the violation, result in a lot of reports that, quite frankly, clog up the phone lines, clog up our radio lines, and divert officers from more productive enforcement activities. Calls like, you know, I'm on such and such 100 block and there are tons of mortars and illegal fireworks going off. This information can still come into the police department. It is often reported through the non-emergency line, and that information is put out as information to units out in the street so they kind of know if they're in that area to check it. But we have found over the years that officers being free to conduct their own proactive enforcement, when they see a violation in an area, it takes some time to hone in and slowly work to identifying a suspect to the point they can be cited. And the really vague, marginally workable calls are somewhat of a distraction to that. And that is the vast majority of these 185 calls are exactly that, virtually unworkable for the police department. It's important to highlight here that other cities in our area have similar challenges. So I said that San Bruno had 185 fireworks related calls for service on the 4th of July. Pacifica, which is the only other San Mateo County city that allows safe and sane fireworks use and sales, had 191. They conduct enforcement very similar to what we do in San Bruno, and their enforcement, like ours, is funded by the sale of safe and sane fireworks. But there are a number of cities that have big problems and do not have safe and sane fireworks. East Palo Alto populated the top of that list this year with 229 calls for service, notably more than in San Bruno. And then we have Daly City with 126, San Mateo with 119, and South San Francisco with 107. So you can see that even where fireworks, safe and sane fireworks, are not legal, there's still a high volume of illegal fireworks being used on the 4th of July and those being reported to their local police departments. Again, important to note that none of those cities allow safe and sane fireworks, and none of them have a funding source for large-scale enforcement. As a result, they do not respond to fireworks-only complaints. If a caller calls to say that they've got illegal fireworks going off in their neighborhood, the police's stance in most of those cities is to put that information out for units so that they can kind of be aware of the problem in the area, but they're not going to automatically dispatch units due to the limited resources and the high volume of calls. So these other cities have issues as well. Enforcement this year, it's important to remember that this is a $1,000 administrative citation that the police department is issuing. And this is a tool that was provided to the police department quite some time ago to be a greater deterrent. In years past, up until a few years back, we actually completed a misdemeanor arrest for violations of 12677 of the Health and Safety Code, which makes it a misdemeanor to use or possess any amount of illegal fireworks. The challenge with those is that they end up going to the courts, and many of those individuals were paying $25, $30, $40 fines and walking out. And so it was not serving as much of a deterrent at all. The city has a municipal code that makes it illegal to use or possess those illegal fireworks, and it comes along with a $1,000 administrative citation for the first offense. And that served as a much better tool for us to create the penalty that we're looking for. It is also very important, once again, I know I sound like a bit of a broken record, but to understand that the citing officer must directly observe a specific person committing a specific violation to issue this administrative citation. This is not negotiable. This is something that is in long established case law and established by the penal code, that for the officer to make an arrest for a crime at this level, that is, it must be committed directly in their presence. They have to directly observe the violation and be able to, with 100% certainty, identify the violator in order to issue a lawful citation. The next challenge is that we have to then safely detain the violator. And this may not seem like a big deal to most people, but if you work in law enforcement, you can understand that the seriousness of this offense, being an administrative citation, essentially a code enforcement violation, coupled with the potential need to use force in order to effect detentions and issue citations, creates a precarious scenario for law enforcement. And so every year we are faced with having to send officers out onto the street, asking them to be very proactive and very aggressive in hunting down these violators and issuing citations under those circumstances, while knowing that we really don't want them using any level of force to effect these detentions and issue these citations, because the risk reward simply is not there. And getting an officer hurt or hurting a member of the public or having a use of force incident that ends up ugly is simply not worth it for conducting this level of enforcement. Again, violators are cited. They're not physically arrested, and under no real circumstances, there are a few, but under no normal circumstances do they go to jail. Only evidence we see in plain view can be seized. So this is also a problem where we may catch a person using illegal fireworks in the middle of the street. We may take that illegal firework and issue them a citation, only to find that they have much more illegal fireworks in a backyard or in a garage or in a vehicle that they then come out and allow someone else to use later. So even when we're making these arrests or issuing these citations, it doesn't always mean that we're taking all of their ability away to continue violating throughout the evening, which has been a problem in the past. There's been a lot of questions about resident provided video. The main question is, hey, if I record one of my neighbors shooting off illegal fireworks, can I call, report that to the police, provide you with that video, and you can issue them a citation? This is a very convoluted issue, and the short answer is no. Again, I fall back to this in-presence legal requirement that the person making the arrest needs to physically observe the violation. That being said, there are some areas we are looking into for next year to determine how that video surveillance might be able to be used. The challenge is that even if we can find the space to use it, we will have to make sure that from that video, the officer issuing the citation can make an absolute positive identification of the violator. And this is a bit of a misconception with video. Video is fantastic. We have video in a large volume of our crimes nowadays because of the proliferation of cameras. But the fact is that oftentimes a camera just shows an individual committing a crime. It doesn't tell the police department who that individual is with the level of certainty that's required in order to make an arrest or issue a citation. And this will certainly be a challenge with third-party video provided to the police department in an effort to spread out our resources and issue more citations year over year. We talked last year about the fact that if you're in control of a social gathering, you can be cited even if you're not the one who is lighting off illegal fireworks. This remains true, but the challenge is that at this point in time, the police department has to not only prove that the individual in control of the party knew the illegal fireworks were going off, which is typically done by the first time we respond out, giving the homeowner or the person in control of a residence a verbal warning and documenting that warning. But we also have to prove responsibility in that they had the ability to stop the illegal fireworks from being used. And this came about last year after we issued a couple of these gathering citations that were not upheld in the appellate hearings. And so these are the two requirements that put some restrictions on us issuing those persons in control violation citations. Enforcement data for this year, you can see on the far left there for 2021. We issued 17 admin cites on the 4th of July. We made 2 physical arrests. The 2 physical arrests, one occurred because a subject who had multiple felony warrants did run from officers after committing an illegal fireworks violation. They gave foot pursuit for several blocks. So due to the warrants, that individual went to jail. The second arrest was because we had a level of intoxication in an individual such that they were not able to care for their own safety and they needed to be taken to a sobering facility. As you track back through the years, you can kind of see how this number lines up with previous years. And it's troubling to look at 2020, where obviously we are less than half the number of citations we issued last year. The first thing to note would be that last year was obviously the highest number of citations we had issued in a single year by almost 2 times. Probably not sustainable year over year, especially because we had several citations dismissed last year. We needed to tighten up the burden of proof and what we were doing in terms of getting the evidence together to issue a citation. The second impact is fewer staff members. As I mentioned earlier, 4 fewer teams is a significant impact to enforcement operations. In addition, we had a slightly shorter peak window of illegal fireworks use this year. So the window of time in which we could issue citations effectively was a little bit shorter. And year over year, the violations are becoming more unobservable. So this would be the people who are lighting illegal fireworks in areas where the officers cannot conduct that direct observation they need in order to issue citations. I understand this can be incredibly frustrating for residents who are saying, either the fireworks are going off over and over again out of my neighbor's backyard, but the fact of the matter remains that we have legal mandates as to where we can go in order to observe violations, secure evidence, and make arrests, especially for these low-level violations. And many times those are going to be almost unenforceable. Of the 17 people who were cited this year, 10 of them were San Bruno residents. The other 7 were people who live outside of our city. We seized about 66 pounds of live illegal fireworks this year. This is about 12 pounds more than last year and 47 pounds over the annual average that we seized. We also seized about 50 pounds of spent fireworks. Those are really only collected when they're evidence of a crime. We don't go around and collect the spent fireworks around the streets. The street department takes care of that as part of their cleanup efforts on the 5th. Getting into costs, it is expensive to conduct the enforcement that we do on the 4th of July. Fortunately, as I've said before, these costs are covered by fees collected from safe and sane fireworks sales, but nonetheless, it is very expensive. So you can kind of work through the different costs here, but the city manager's office put together an educational mailer this year, sent it out to every resident in town. Police department put together a video public service announcement. We have additional staff on the 4th from community services. The fire marshal administrative and inspection hours to handle the booth inspections. 4th of July staffing and logistics increased for fire and police. Pre and post 4th of July education, enforcement, and logistics, and then cleanup costs. Obviously, the bulk of this expense is the 4th of July staffing and logistics for the police department at almost $30,000, about half of the $60,680 expense of our enforcement and education operations surrounding the 4th of July. Every year, the police department conducts an annual debrief in an effort to learn lessons from that year's enforcement and safety campaign and to come up with new ideas for the next year. This debrief is actually a formal process that takes far longer than the few days that have passed since the 4th of July at this point. But I can tell you that we debrief immediately as well to come up with some things to talk about here. The first focus is to enhance what works well. As I mentioned earlier, we know that the use of undercover surveillance units is really about the most effective way to issue citations that stick and that people have to actually pay. There are some challenges with getting enough undercover vehicles and undercover officers to expand this, but we'll be looking to expand it next year through a variety of different means. We also know that we need to conduct what we call buy-bust operations throughout the year and not just in the days leading up to the 4th of July. The reality is that illegal fireworks are making their way in for next 4th of July as we speak. And if we're not active at the investigative level and attempting to intervene in those sales and to try to take down the larger scale supply operations, which will require working with other jurisdictions such as the San Francisco Police Department, then we really don't do a very good job of seizing a lot of illegal fireworks before they end up in the hands of end users. Similar to fighting a drug problem, this is going to be more effective than just dealing with the line level user. And so we know that we need to expand those operations. We also need to increase our use of data to direct resources. As I mentioned, we did that this year with live real-time data during the event, and we will expand that into next year. We need to reduce or eliminate what is ineffective. And I already mentioned it, but it's these responses to calls without the critical information to really be enforceable or enable officers to take action. When you have 160 calls for service and some 24 sworn officers working a detail, it's pretty, and it's all happening in a 2.5 to 3 hour window of time. You can simply do the math and see that we're talking about more than a call a minute. And to handle that 1 call per minute is dispatching officers constantly, continuously. Before they can even get to a call, they're being dispatched to the next call. And it's not an effective way to conduct enforcement. This is not a new concept, by the way. You can date back all the way to Sir Peel and his founding of the tenets of modern law enforcement in the late 1800s, which made it very clear that the only way we get compliance with the law is through voluntary cooperation of the community. Ultimately, it's not going to be enforcement that solves the problems with rampant illegal fireworks use. It's going to have to be a better behaving community. We'll also be considering other enhancements. One particular enhancement we're really looking at a great deal is what we're calling streamlined ID and cite later procedures. Right now, if an officer makes an arrest for an illegal fireworks violation on the 4th of July, like we already mentioned that they need to go through the process, it'll be 10, 15, 20 minutes to conduct the observation, get in close enough, safely detain the person. Then they've got to ID the individual, process evidence, take booking photos, and then take the evidence over for safe disposal because oftentimes these things are considered to be explosive or dangerous devices. All in all, it's about 45 minutes to an hour for one site and release. So again, if you do the math and you've got hundreds and hundreds of people using illegal fireworks on the 4th of July and a handful of officers conducting enforcement, even if they are ultra diligent, if all that major violating is occurring in a 3-hour window, the average team can issue 3 to 4 citations during that period of time. That is not going to be enough to really dent the illegal fireworks use that goes on every 4th of July. So we're looking at a streamlined ID and cite later procedure, which would involve simply moving in to identify the violator, moving on from there and issuing a citation at a later date via the mail in order to eliminate the evidence processing, booking, and identification processes that take so much time. There are a number of challenges there because the evidence can be very important to the case and to the sites being upheld. But I think that we can probably work around some of those things and get to a happy medium where we can expedite our citing procedures and enable us to take on more enforcement on the 4th. Additionally, we are talking, as I mentioned earlier, about the use of third-party video evidence. There will be a lot of work involved there in the next 12 months, but I think that we'll get to a point where we can at least make some use of all of the good residents in town that are trying to do their best to help us. And finally, use of the unmanned aircraft system and drone. That would have occurred this year, except that COVID kind of created some setbacks in the deployment of our UAS drone program. That program will be up and running certainly by next 4th of July. It doesn't necessarily mean that enforcement becomes particularly easier using those devices, but it does enable us to conduct more widespread observation and to hone officers into where they need to be more quickly and easily. So with that, I will turn it over to Chief DeLay to talk about the fire side of the 4th of July safety operations.
Ari, we are not hearing you.
Ari, if you want me to take these slides, just let me know. I don't know if you're gonna be able to solve the issue you're having or not. No volume, sir.
Can you hear me? You got me?
Yep.
Great. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what was going on there, but we're here. Good evening, Honorable Mayor, member of the council, Ari DeLay, your fire chief. Thank you again for having us this evening to provide a brief synopsis of the 4th of July operations for the San Bruno Police Department and the San Bruno Fire Department. If I can get the next slide, please. For the 4th of July celebration and the day itself, the San Bruno Fire Department staffed, in addition to its normal day-to-day staffing, which is 2 engines and 1 truck company, we staffed an additional ALS engine company to help best protect the city. In addition, we had all of our fire prevention staff on duty for the day, and myself as your fire chief was there for the entire event, again with Chief Johansen as well. If I could have the next slide, please. Calls for service. We handled approximately 19 calls for service on the 4th of July, and that was for the entire day. So a fairly light day for us, honestly, all things considered. And again, as Chief Johansen alluded to, our peak activity period for the fire department was approximately 9 to 11:30 in the evening, was when we saw the majority of our calls for service. 32% of the calls of service for the fire department were fireworks related. And if I could have the next slide, please. And as you can see, this is just a breakdown of calls for service that the fire department responded to leading up to the 4th of July and the 4th of July itself and the preceding days. So fairly light as far as actual fire calls. The 4th of July celebration was again, it was light for calls for service for fire-related calls, but the overall volume of fireworks, both legal and illegal, was fairly heavy this year as years in the past. If I could have the next slide, please. A couple of our observations, the illegal fireworks was heavy this year as it has been in the past. Our prevention and early detection efforts were critical in trying to prevent a lot of those things from happening. And then I'd just like to make a special note and thanks to our Public Works and Parks Department for their efforts leading up to the 4th of July in the weed abatement and fire prevention efforts prior to the 4th, and also the Parks Department for their work on that same weed abatement with their contractors and their crews, and also the hard work was done after the 4th of July event, because there's quite a bit of cleanup that has to take place every year after the event itself. And one thing I just wanted to really point out, we had Pacifica, I know, had an injury, a couple of injuries to civilians, and we did have one significant injury. And this particular injury was due to illegal fireworks. Not the safe and sane kind where they're less dangerous, but illegal fireworks. And the important piece to note here is some of these illegal fireworks are sold to people and they get their hands on them, and they're not really built in the same way that a normal firework is from a safe and sane perspective. They have some what they call fast fuses, and these fuses, they might seem 4 or 5 inches long, but they literally go off in a half a second, and these fireworks can explode and cause a lot of significant injuries. And that happened during the 4th of July here in the city of San Bruno. And it's been quite some time, I think, since we've had a significant injury from fireworks. And this particular one, just important to note, is from illegal fireworks. And I really, really wanted to stress the point that they are super dangerous, and they're for, some of those larger type fireworks are for professional fireworks displays, and they get in the hands of civilians, and they're not really made for our use, and they're not really designed that way. So if I could just have the next slide, please. And with that, that concludes our presentation from the Chief Johansen and myself, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you both chiefs for your report, and thank you to all the city staff that you have highlighted that assisted up to the 4th and thereafter. So comments or questions from my colleagues? Councilmember Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to thank both of the chiefs and their staff for all the work. A few of us were poking around there that night and really got to see firsthand how busy everybody was and how dedicated and how upbeat everybody was, even though they were working on a holiday. So definitely appreciate all that extra work. I did have one question. Going back to the trend we saw on slide 8, and I was wondering, Chief Johansen, if there was anything significant that happened between 16 and 17 that increased the number of citations, and was that because of the volume of infractions, or was it due to an increase in enforcement?
Yes, Councilmember, that's actually a really good question. That in that particular year is when we finally started to kind of learn we needed to streamline the citation process. So we used to deploy units and just kind of send them out to the street and say, hey, go try to find illegal fireworks and do the best you can. And we were still doing arrests at that point in time, not issuing administrative citations. And so what we did is we streamlined that process and created basically an assembly processing line at the police department, where officers arrested the subject, put them in handcuffs, put them in the car, brought them to the station, and passed them off to a group that would then handle the booking and the evidence and the photos, while the team was able to go back out on the street and conduct enforcement once again. And so we started to kind of see this new efficiency, whereas in a typical year, honestly, a team might do one arrest when we were doing the 12,677 arrests, and it went to them doing, 2 or 3 or 4 per team, and got us moving a little bit better.
Great. All right. Thanks for that clarification, and thanks again for all the work.
Thank you.
Councilmember Mason.
Thank you for a great presentation. This is for police. I just wanted to ask, there was a comment made by the chief earlier about some of the citations from last year being dismissed. And I was just wondering, I guess what caused it, and maybe if you can give an example. Thank you.
Yeah, a good question as well. Thank you. So the citations, they're administrative citations. So the first step in an appeal process is that they have a hearing with a hearing officer, an impartial hearing officer that's appointed by the city to sit through and hear their evidence and hear the officer's evidence. And really, there's no single reason why a case, gets upheld or dismissed. To be honest, at the end of the day, it's up to that hearing officer. I've seen citations dismissed because someone shows up and says they can't afford to pay them. However, I've also seen citations dismissed because the hearing officer didn't feel that the burden of proof was met. Last year, we saw that with a couple of these citations issued to homeowners, where the hearing officer just didn't feel that we had enough proof that the homeowner could have or should have stopped the illegal fireworks usage, and they were hesitant to hit them with a $1,000 fine. Still over the years, rarely, but I have seen citations dismissed because the officers didn't do a thorough enough job of writing a good report. Or the officer was sick and couldn't show up to testify at a hearing. So there's a litany of different reasons why they might be dismissed. But quite frankly, in my experience, and I've been handling those hearings for the police department as the oversight for 5 years now, very, very few are dismissed. Last year was the first time I saw more than one or two. And I think it really was because the hearing officer wasn't as comfortable as we were operationally with these homeowner citations. And some of that is just educating the hearing officer that, this is what the Muni Code says, and it's pretty sound. And some of it is about making sure the officers do what they need to for those tickets to be upheld.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Hamilton.
Thank you. I just want to echo my colleagues' thanks for the whole San Bruno team and working on the holiday and all this hard work. So I just want to confirm that $60,000 in cost, that was 100% covered by the Safe and Sane fireworks sales. Is that correct?
That is my understanding, yes, that the cost of the operation is covered by that 8% tax that gets levied for the sales of Safe and Sane fireworks.
Great, thank you. So I was curious about, you touched on it briefly about the other enhancements, the use of third-party video evidence, and we talk about this a lot year after year, and you mentioned it in your presentation how residents are trying to help and say, look, I got them here on video, but that's not usable. So are we thinking that there's going to be some changes in the law, or what do we think can be done with that going forward?
So this is an interesting area of law that, in my opinion, is not actually clearly articulated in established case law. Video evidence, while not new to any of us, is actually fairly new to the criminal justice system. And the question that looms there is, can it count as direct observation if that observation is conducted of video and not of the actual violation? And if so, in what time frame? Would it be contemporaneous enough to be a continuation of the offense and to qualify for the direct observation? The challenge here is that, thinking more globally about the good of communities and law enforcement, I don't think we want the first case evaluated for that case law question to involve something like illegal fireworks enforcement. I think it will be something taken into account by a court that says, wow, I just really don't think we want to open that door for police to be issuing citations based on something they see on video. And so it's more a matter of looking into it in depth, working with the city attorney, who I see is pictured in, so he may have more to add here as the expert than I do. But it's about working with that video and determining at what point is it usable, and is there a mechanism? So for example, the misdemeanor requirement is circumvented with warrants. So if we have a misdemeanor not committed in our presence, but we want the individual to ultimately be held accountable for it, we simply can't arrest them on the spot. We submit a case to the district attorney, and if the judge feels that there's enough there, they'll issue a warrant for the arrest. But here we're dealing with the municipal code violation, for which that's not really a feasible mechanism that the court would appreciate. So it's just trying to figure out where's the happy medium and what evidence can we take from the community and put to good use to be better at enforcement. City Attorney, did you have something to add to that?
Only a very brief point about the use of video evidence that you didn't touch on, which is that in order for that video evidence normally to be admissible in court, it has to be authenticated. And in order to be authenticated, the person who took the video has to say, that was me, I took the video. And so then the city is relying on a sort of third party really has very little connection with the city, except they were there taking a video, to show up at scheduled appeal hearings and show up in court and so on and so forth, which may not be what they signed up for, right? They just took a video and are turning it over to the police department. So this is very similar to somebody reporting a code enforcement violation of any sort of garden variety kind. That's why staff has to go out and, in order to write a citation, has to verify that the violation exists. They can't just take somebody else's word for it.
Great, thank you very much.
City Manager, did you want to follow up on Councilmember Hamilton on the cost recovery?
Exactly. Thank you, Mayor Medina. Jovan, Grogan, City Manager, I just wanted to follow up. Councilmember Hamilton asked, has that $60,000 been reimbursed? The answer is not yet. The fireworks vendors have until September 30th to file paperwork with the city demonstrating their full gross receipts revenue, and then the city will send an invoice to each of the vendor for their pro rata share of that $60,000. The police chief did mention a 8% tax. I just want to clarify that the city does not have a 8% tax. There were some fire booth vendors that added a 8% or some percent fee on top of the transaction. That is their choice, but we do not have a set percentage tax. What our municipal code says is that the active fireworks vendors are responsible for their pro rata share of the city's cost related to fireworks, and that's at full $60,000. Just wanted to provide that clarification.
Thank you for clarifying that. I wasn't implying that we have the cash in hand yet, but that we were going to end up being square for it from the vendors eventually, and we will. So thank you.
Vice Mayor Medina.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Medina, Mayor Medina. I wanted to thank staff. That's everyone, just like my other colleagues, police, fire, parks, and public works. To be away from your family on Independence Day is tough, and I was fortunate enough to be able to be at the briefing along with the mayor and Councilman Salazar, and then to go along on a ride along for a little bit to kind of see and witness for myself how difficult it is. And then I was able to go home and participate in the fun part of safe and sane fireworks. In our neighborhood, we were able to enjoy lighting the safe and sane ones, and then we're able to go home, and while all the illegal ones were going off for quite a bit of the night, and acknowledging that as we were driving through, our San Bruno residents were basically, the majority of them were following the rules, following the law, waving as the police officer went by, and thumbs up. And I think they were happy to see that the police had a presence. And I just wanted to acknowledge that sacrifice. The illegal fireworks are something that are all over. Everything that was being lit prior to the fireworks sales were illegal. And that's really important to keep in mind. And I look forward to the changes and in technology use that will be implemented next year to improve the chances of catching those that are using the illegal ones. And hopefully, I don't think it'll ever go away, because people just are gonna decide to break the law, whether it's speeding, whether it's running a red light, or doing a California stop at a stop sign. People make poor choices, and sometimes people get hurt by it. And those fireworks are really, really annoying and damaging to some people in our community. And unfortunately, some people just don't care. So thanks to all staff for their efforts. And I'm glad there was only one injury. It's a serious problem So hopefully people are going to learn by it. Thank you.
Councilmember Mason, you have your hand up again, and then we'll go to you, and then I will finish up with my final comments on the topic.
Great, thank you. I vaguely recall last year's presentation and I hearing tonight around the comments around the camera footage. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but this is just based on recollection that last year there was a recommendation or almost to videotape people who are using illegal fireworks as long as it's safe to do so. And based on what I just heard now, it sounds like it is really quite difficult to use that video footage. So I'm just curious to know what the recommendation would be now, given 2 years in the position that you're in, Chief.
Yeah, it's a difficult space, right? So I think part of what you're referring to is that last year there was a high level of interest from the more proactive elements in our community, who, by the way, we're eternally grateful for, and is one of the things that makes San Bruno a unique place to live, work, and play. That they wanted to chip in and said, look, we know that you can't be everywhere at once. So what do you want us to do when we see something? And first was to give them a measure of caution, right? Safety always has to be the first thing. And as we've found in many years, had to learn the hard way, when you introduce high volume of alcohol into these celebrations and illegal fireworks, oftentimes people act very irrationally. And the last thing we want to be responding to is a good Samaritan trying to help the police department that ends up in a physical altercation with a neighbor or someone from out of the community that's come in to use illegal fireworks. And so we were trying to give a measure of caution there. I would say that, as I mentioned earlier, and as the city attorney touched on, you're absolutely right. The usability of that to actually just flat out issue a citation, it's really not there at this point in time. It doesn't mean, however, that video is of no value. When paired together with a citation where, sometimes these citations operate in that gray area where an officer is a half block away and they see someone in the dark go over and lean down and light an illegal firework in the middle of the street, and they move in quickly and that person has moved over to the sidewalk and is now in a little bit of a crowd. But the officer is sure enough that they have the right person to issue a citation. Well, if we couple that with a neighbor that says, hey, the cops were out here and I was shooting video, now we have some added evidence that can be of value to the officer, as long as the citizen or the resident was able to get that video without putting themselves in harm's way. It also can help to direct us in. So if you call to report a violation and you know who the person is and you're able to show that to the officer, we can circulate that out to these plainclothes and undercover units who can then sort of target that individual in their surveillance and come in and try to conduct the observations needed to actually get the citation issued in a way that's a lot more effective than just coming in blind to a large crowd and trying to see who's shooting them off. So even if it can't be used as the direct evidence or as the sole evidence to issue a citation, it is still valuable if obtained safely by the resident.
For myself,
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. For myself, as was indicated, Councilmember Salazar and Vice Mayor Medina and I did do a ride-along. They let us sit in the front, not in the back, and we went in separate vehicles so we could touch each beat that was in town from different perspectives. I also, just on mine, Daly City had a council meeting last night, and they were talking about the illegal fireworks. Keep in mind, they do not have safe and sane. One council member said as of Sunday, he was still hearing the booms. The mayor there thought about putting a committee together. They felt it was worse. I put out a before the 4th, the day before, then the day of the 4th, and the day after the 4th, the Pacific mayor and I talked on each of those occasions just to get an idea of how it was going in, that our city versus their city in regards to being the only two in the county with safe and sane fireworks. I also sent out a survey to probably about a dozen mayors within the county of San Mateo, just to ask them some simple questions about, do they have additional staffing on the 4th from police, yes or no, fire, yes or no. Did they think it was worse than, equal to, or less than for illegals, because they don't have safe and sane, from 2020 versus 2021, and how they administer any fines or assessments, and then any additional comments. So those are coming in, but there's and again, it's an opinion of one, but there is a mayor further down south who feels it was worse in his community than it was last year. We're still getting some of that data in as they get the data that we received tonight. So again, to echo my colleagues, I wanted to thank all staff. I've seen this for quite a few years, been at the briefing and the ride along. And it's not an easy task, and it's not an easy job. And it obviously is taking away from one's friends and family and other areas that one may wish to focus on, but cannot thank enough and remind our residents that this monies are recouped from the booths that sell the fireworks to those folks. There are other communities that don't have that resource, and therefore they're at regular staffing, even with the additional calls that was indicated by the police chief. So again, thank you both for your report. Thank you to the staff and the team. And I guess what I could say is, I guess we'll see you next year. So thank you to both. Why don't we go ahead, and if there is nothing else, I think I'm frozen. Okay, I'm not. Okay,